Good afternoon, everybody. I am not entirely sure at the moment whether you can see me. Simon, can you confirm that everybody can see me?
Yep.
Good. Okay, fantastic. I'm delighted to welcome you all at this webinar on conspiracy theories and violent extremism. My name is Manuel Eisner. I'm the Wolfson Professor of Criminology and the Director of the Violence Research Center at the University of Cambridge. The speakers today are Bettina Rottweiler and Gill from the Department of Security and Crime Science at the University College London. After the talk, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. And please, if you want to raise a question, use the question and answer button that you see at the bottom. And those who find a question interesting, please like this question, because that will help me to see which questions are particularly interesting to the audience. Just briefly about the speakers today, Bettina Rottweiler is a second-year PhD student at University College London. Her research interests include violent extremism, radicalization, and terrorism. Before she joined University College London, Bettina undertook a Bachelor in Social Science at the University of Stuttgart and a Master's in International Relations at Brunel University in London. PhD project analyzes the social ecology of radicalization in Germany, and her presentation today will draw on this ongoing work, as well as a brand new study that has come out very recently in the journal Terrorism and Political Violence. The title of that journal article is Conspiracy Beliefs and Violent Extremist Intentions, the Contingent Effects of Self-Efficacy, Self-Control, and Law-Related Morality. Professor Paul Gill holds a PhD in political science at an MA in international relations and a BSc from the School of Politics and International Relations at University College Dublin. He is an expert in terrorism research. His research examines the causes and patterns of terrorism and the actors that perpetrate terrorist attacks. I just want to mention that one of the research specialisms of his, which also he became very famous for, is recent research on lone actor terrorists. And he recently published the first ever book on the topic of lone actor terrorists. Before I hand over to Bettina and Paul, I would like to express my special excitement about having a presentation, a talk on the topic of conspiracy theories and violence, not just because it is such a timely topic, but also because I think it's such an important topic for criminology. Past decade, if you look at it, research on conspiracy theories has moved from being marginal and at times maybe even a ridiculed topic to a burgeoning and increasingly diverse area of research with contributions from social psychology, contributions from cognitive psychology, philosophy, history, and sociology. Academic contributions from psychology have so far, I don't know whether Bettina and Paul would disagree with this, so far have been relatively rare. And this can hardly be the result of a lack of disciplinary relevance. So for instance, if the core unifying concern of conspiracy theories really is whether there are people out there that conspire to do harm against you. That is such a critical concern that bears on questions of social order. It bears on questions of legitimacy, of fear, of justice, of cooperation, and trust and violence. And all these are genuinely important concerns of criminology. Many genocides are motivated by some kind of conspiracy theories about the evil machinations of others. Organized criminals very often are concerned about somebody conspiring against them and what kind of measures should be taken against them. In my own work a few years ago about killing kings, the murder of kings and queens, it emerged that conspiracies and fears of conspiracy were by far the most consistent theme across all these events. And then this continues with political murders in the contemporary world. And of course, and that leads to the talk that Bettina and Paul will be giving today, of course, behind all violent extremist beliefs, conspiracy theories about somebody threatening plays such an important role as a legitimizing factor for engaging in violent behavior. So I think it's a hugely important topic, and Paul and Bettina are pioneering criminological work in this area. And so it's a great pleasure for me to have the two of them here with us. So with these words, I hand over to you, Bettina. The floor is yours.
Great. So, hi everyone. I'm just trying to share, 1 second, my slides. Okay, hope you can see it well now. Give me 1 second. Here. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be speaking here today and to be able to present mine and Paul Gill's newest research findings. As Manuel has said, my name is Bettina, and I work on the European Research Council funded project called GRIEVANCE, which is led by Paul Gill, and we are based in the Department of Security and Crime Science at UCL. The focus of today's presentation is on the relationship between conspiracy beliefs and violent extremism. So the main focus of my recent work is to examine the impact of conspiracy thinking on violent extremism, and more specifically to identify how and when belief in conspiracy theories can lead to violent extremism. So all studies presented today are part of the GRIEVANCE Project and focus on the risk of radicalization towards violent extremism. So the presentation today is split into 3 main parts. The first part will give you a brief overview of how widespread conspiracy beliefs are and who most strongly believes in them. I will then address the psychology of conspiracy theories, which looks at the psychological motives which draw people to conspiracy theories. And I will also outline the functional role conspiracy beliefs can play within violent extremism. Moving on to the second part, I will then present our newest research findings from the UK, where we look at the psychological mechanisms underlying conspiracy beliefs and violent extremism. And this analysis aims to explain why people engage in conspiracy thinking and how this in turn is related to violent extremist intentions. And then the third part tries to further delineate this relationship. The second empirical study is based on data from Germany and looks at the contingent effects of conspiracy beliefs and violent extremism. And this study aimed to identify for what kinds of people or people with what types of characteristics are most likely to engage in violent extremist behaviors if they hold conspiracy beliefs. So first, what are conspiracy theories and how can we define them? While there's a whole range of conspiracy theories out there, the definition we have adopted for our research describes conspiracy theories as the ultimate explanations for important events that involve secret plots by powerful and malevolent groups. So what all these different conspiracy theories have in common is that they try to explain an impactful event, such as a social or political issue allegedly caused by secretive groups of malicious people who are also perceived to be powerful. And interestingly, research shows that despite vast differences in the content of individual conspiracy theories, they tend to share similar underlying psychological mechanisms, such as fundamental sense-making processes about distressing and threatening societal events in order to provide explanation for these complex issues. So if we turn to the popularity of conspiracy theories, we found that conspiracy beliefs are widespread within the general population. In order to measure those beliefs, we applied generic measures, meaning we assessed general tendencies towards conspiracy thinking rather than asking about specific events. And we measured these on 7-point Likert scales, where 1 always meant I fully disagree and 7 meant I fully agree. So in Germany, for example, we found that 21% hold a generic tendency to believe in conspiracy theories. So meaning that in average, 21% of respondents indicated that they agreed or fully agreed to the conspiracy items. So meaning they scored 6 or 7 on the 1 to 7-point scale. So while these numbers are concerning, it is really worth noting that surveys on conspiracy theories have shown that people tend to agree to things they just have heard of. So these numbers are definitely showing a worrying trend, but I would be aware that some of these numbers might be slightly inflated, just to let you know. And the mean of the scale, again, from 1 to 7, was at 4.33. So in the UK, these beliefs are even more widespread, and we found that 37% of the population in our sample hold a propensity to engage in conspiracy thinking. The mean for the scale was, 4.82. We also operationalized another generic conspiracy scale in the UK, which differentiated between different types of conspiracy theories. And here again, we saw that 12% of respondents agreed or fully agreed to the generic conspiracy scale. And the mean for this measure was 3.17. So who believes most strongly in conspiracy theories? Here we looked at differences between various groups. So for example, are men or women more likely to engage in conspiracy thinking? And these findings are also all based on our nationally representative surveys. And we, for example, found that men were slightly more likely to engage in conspiracy thinking than women. However, the differences between the two groups, or between men and women, was relatively small. So we also found that younger individuals hold slightly stronger conspiracy beliefs, and we saw that this effect was decreasing with age. So the older the respondents get, in average, they tended to believe slightly less in conspiracy theories, but also same as for gender, we only found weak differences. However, when we looked at education, we found that individuals with lower educational levels showed significantly stronger conspiracy thinking, and here we found strong mean differences. So if we look at Germany, we found slightly different results, as we couldn't find any differences for men or women, and we also couldn't find any age differences, so meaning younger or older people weren't more likely to believe or to engage in conspiracy theories. And education, we found the same almost as for the UK, that individuals with lower educational levels show significantly stronger conspiracy thinking. And here we also found strong mean differences. So these slight differences between Germany and the UK aren't surprising, though, as we saw that the differences for gender and age, which we found in the UK, were pretty weak. So if we look at the impact of COVID-19 and the recent proliferation of conspiracy theories, we definitely have seen an increase during this pandemic. We know from history that conspiracy beliefs tend to particularly thrive in times of crisis, where people are seeking to make sense of a chaotic world and are striving for simple answers to complex processes. This pandemic has provided a fertile ground for these conspiracy theories, and psychological needs are under stress. And we have seen that conspiracy thinking increases when we feel uncertain, out of control, or threatened. But I will speak in more detail later about the psychological mechanisms underlying this. However, we also saw for our German data from 2019 that conspiracy beliefs have been widespread even before the pandemic. And we also know that conspiracy theories have been around for centuries and that people always tended to believe in them to like a certain extent. Yet we suggest in all our research that when we are trying to understand the relationship between conspiracy theories and violent extremism, we have to apply a much more nuanced approach. Therefore, for example, Paul and I argue in our news research that not every conspiracy theory will be equally impactful in predicting individuals' extremist intentions. And our analysis shows indeed that anti-government conspiracy theories have the strongest effect on violent extremist intentions. This might seem obvious to some of you, but it was important for us to run this analysis as it hadn't been demonstrated empirically yet. We generally see that these anti-government conspiracy narratives spread during major crises and often raise tremendous distrust towards governments. And as I said, during the COVID-19 pandemic, extremist groups have been exploiting that lack of trust and confidence and have successfully propagated anti-government sentiments. And we have seen that especially deep state and far-right anti-establishment conspiracy theories, such as those captured under the umbrella conspiracy theory QAnon, are on the rise. I'm sure most of you have heard of QAnon, but I will provide a very brief introduction. QAnon involves a whole range of conspiracy theories, but at the heart really is this unfounded conspiracy theory that a cabal of satanic pedophile elites, including prominent Democrats, celebrities, and other influential figures, are running a global child sex trafficking ring. And these QAnon believers generally see these elites as being responsible for a lot of evil in our world. And they think that ex-president Donald Trump is or was the only hope in defeating this deep state. So experts have started arguing now that the fringe of QAnon really has developed into a decentralized and ideologically motivated violent extremist movement with an increasingly diversified and broad base of support. And the challenging thing really is that QAnon has shown to constantly adapt and to absorb other conspiracy narratives. And the movement's narratives are particularly dangerous because they often create that sense of urgency by calling on existential threats and by inciting violence. And one of the most notable recent incidents was the US Capitol attack, which took place on January 6th. Analyses have shown that the pro-Trump rioters who actually stormed the Capitol Hill came from a wide range of groups across the far-right scene. Yet despite these varying motives and political agendas, what seemingly united the majority of these rioters were false claims entrenched in various conspiracy theories that the US presidential election was rigged. And this incident really clearly demonstrated a gradual offline and not just online integration and really like an increasing convergence between various far-right groups and QAnon believers. Turning to the psychology of conspiracy theories. Psychological research widely recognizes that there is a general human desire to have basic psychological needs met. However, if these psychological needs are not fulfilled, individuals might engage in ways to restore those needs. As such, believing conspiracy theories may be the result of certain psychological motives, such as the need to restore understanding, meaning, or control of one's life. So really by acting as a coping mechanism, these beliefs intend to satisfy important psychological needs when these are threatened. And in our work, we apply a framework developed by Karen Douglas and colleagues, and we argue that believing conspiracy theories is driven by motives that can be characterized as epistemic, such as understanding one's environment, existential, such as being safe and in control of one's environment, and social, such as maintaining a positive image of the self and the social group. So more specifically, epistemic needs can prompt individuals to adopt conspiracy beliefs in order to achieve that clear, structured understanding of the world. Causal explanations for events are a core part of building up a stable, accurate, and internally consistent understanding of the world. Relatedly, as I mentioned earlier, conspiracy beliefs appear to provide broad and seemingly consistent explanations that allow people to deal with uncertainty. And research has shown that conspiracy beliefs are indeed stronger when people experience distress as a result of feeling uncertain. Individuals may also be more susceptible to conspiratorial thinking when existential needs such as feelings of control and feeling safe in one's environment are threatened. As such, people may be more likely to turn to conspiracy theories when they are anxious, feel powerless, as well as alienated from society. And lastly, social motivations, including the desire to belong and to maintain a positive image of the self and the in-group, can be linked to conspiracy thinking. Conspiracy theories seem to be particularly appealing to people who find the positive image of the self or the in-group is threatened. As such, conspiracy theories may be recruited defensively in order to provide justification for individuals' disadvantaged positions. And therefore, we argue it may be that the endorsement of conspiracy theories may act as a coping mechanism in order to deal with these epistemic, existential, and social issues by providing a straightforward explanatory framework which ultimately intends to restore a sense of control and certainty over distressing life events, or maybe to uplift their own or their group's image. So if we look now at the functional role of conspiracy theories and violent extremism, then we argue that conspiracy theories can be thought of as radicalizing multipliers which contribute and strengthen extremist ideologies, internal dynamics, and psychological processes within groups, prompting an increased acceptance of and willingness to use violent means. As such, conspiracy theories may be used to increase threat perception and subsequent in-group identification. These processes exacerbate in-group, out-group distinctions, such as providing an us versus them rhetoric, which can lead to group polarization and in the most extreme cases may lead to the dehumanization of enemies. So by providing the unifying narrative of a malicious enemy, conspiracy theories can hold extremist groups together and push them into a more extreme direction. Correspondingly, conspiracy narratives have often been used by extremists to provide that justification for violence. And as we have seen, that an important component, we know that, of extremist propaganda is to facilitate the shift towards violent acts. And more specifically then by framing extreme narratives which portray that the group one strongly identifies with is under attack, that may render violence a necessary means to defend that group. So the first empirical analysis is based on UK nationally representative data, which we collected in July 2020. This survey was conducted in order to examine individual level predictors for violent extremism, with a specific focus on examining the effects of conspiracy theories and violent extremism. As I said earlier, the main focus of my recent work is to identify how and when beliefs in conspiracy theories can lead to violent extremism. So Paul and I wanted to conduct this research as we had seen a trend in previous years, so before the pandemic happened in 2020, where conspiracy beliefs have led to real world violence. So for example, a series of recent far-right attacks have occurred across the US, Germany, and New Zealand. So what all of these attacks had in common was that each perpetrator referenced far-right conspiracy theories such as the Great Replacement theory or white genocide in their manifestos. It became clear that these extreme conspiratorial worldviews inspired the attacks by prompting a sense of urgency and by calling for violent action to be taken. In addition, in a 2019 FBI report on 52 lone actor terrorists showed that almost half of those extensively discussed or consumed information about conspiracy theories. And the same year, the FBI also stated that the fringe part of the QAnon movement poses a threat to domestic security and that it has the potential to lead to domestic acts of violence. And the Capitol attack has shown that it can indeed mobilize people to engage in illegal and violent action. So coming back to the psychological motives for believing in conspiracy theories, due to the fact of empirical and especially quantitative work in regard to that topic, we decided to conduct an analysis which examines the psychological factors linking conspiracy beliefs and violent extremism. So we can ask ourselves what happens if certain psychological needs are constantly unmet or threatened. And we argue that individuals with constant unmet needs may develop psychological risk factors, and the first study examines these grievances. We expect that people are most susceptible to conspiracy theories when they hold those risk factors due to particular psychological needs being frustrated. So, yet these risk factors may also increase individuals' willingness to engage in violent extremist behaviors. And we then further argue that these grievances might also link conspiracy beliefs to violent extremism indirectly. So our work suggests that belief in extreme ideologies and conspiracy theories share a similar underlying psychology, which aims to fulfill certain epistemic, existential, and social needs. Especially when these needs are threatened or unmet. So similar to conspiracy beliefs, which are fundamentally rooted in sense-making processes, extremist beliefs also aim to structure the world in a clear-cut manner and intend to reduce feelings of uncertainty. Additionally, conspiracy theories also aim to fulfill basic needs which many extremists have also shown to strive for, such as cognitive closure and to overcome issues related to perceived powerlessness and feelings of anomia. So, as I mentioned earlier already, extremist conspiracy theories may also be recruited defensively and are there to identify a common enemy, particularly when these groups feel threatened. And we argue that individuals reporting these risk factors are likely deprived of these basic human needs and may engage in ways to restore them. And ultimately, we expect that these risk factors will lead to increased conspiracy beliefs and stronger violent extremist intentions. So more specifically, we expect that individuals who are deprived of epistemic needs, such as they lack an understanding of their environment, particularly thrive for subjective certainty, which renders them more susceptible to dogmatic thinking styles in order to really achieve that clear, structured understanding of the world. And therefore, we expect that reporting stronger dogmatic thinking will be linked to a stronger conspiracy mentality, as well as more extremist intentions. Second, we hypothesize that experiencing unmet or threatened existential needs, such as feeling alienated, will be also related to stronger conspiracy beliefs and to stronger intentions to engage in violent extremism in order to restore meaning and a sense of control. Third, people who are experiencing unmet social needs, such as that their group is threatened due to that their group image is threatened due to being discriminated or victimized, will be more inclined to engage in ways to enhance their group's image. However, we were also interested to see whether there are any protective factors which will be linked to weaker conspiracy thinking and less extremist intentions. And we hypothesized that experiencing a stronger procedural justice towards authority, such as believing in the fairness and legitimacy of authorities and having trust towards them, will decrease these effects. And also we hypothesized that whether having a stronger internal locus of control, such as having the feeling of being in control of various aspects of one's life, could act as a protective factor. So in order to measure all these constructs within our general population sample, we use several validated scales, which I will present in the following. Each scale consists of several items, which we added together to calculate a score for each respondent. And all of our individual items, again, are measured on 7-point Likert scale, where 1 means I fully disagree and 7 means I fully agree. And in order to measure violent extremist intentions in our general population sample, we assess participants' willingness to engage in illegal and violent political action on behalf of a group with whom the individuals previously identified most strongly with. And example items are, I would continue to support an organization that fights for my group's political and legal rights, even if the organization sometimes resorts to violence. And another one, I would participate in a public protest against the oppression of my group, even if I thought the protest might turn violent. So coming now to conspiracy mentality, previous research has shown that conspiracy beliefs are largely determined by a general propensity towards conspiracy thinking, a so-called conspiracy mentality. So this renders people who believe in one conspiracy much more likely to also believe in other conspiracy theories. And in order to measure such a conspiracy mentality, we asked participants how much they agreed with, for example, their secret organizations that greatly influence political decisions, or many very important things happen in the world which the public is never informed about. So going over to the next scale, we measured dogmatic thinking with 6 different items. One was, if everyone would think about it the right way, they would hold the same opinions as I do. And then the construct of alienation was assessed with 4 different items which tap into individual level strengths. One item was, I feel I don't get what I deserve in life. And the third measure was our 4-item collective deprivation scale, which measured deprivation, victimization, and unfair treatment based on a group individuals also previously identified most strongly with. And an example item was, it makes me angry when I think of how my group is treated in comparison to other groups in the UK. So then our protective measures, we assess procedural justice with 4 different items. One was, I feel I'm treated fairly by authorities and law enforcement. And the measure of internal locus of control taps into individuals' feelings of control over various aspects of their lives. And my life is determined by my own actions was one of the items. So it's also worth mentioning here that the studies presented today are all cross-sectional, so which means we can't speak of cause-effect relationships. As such, while we won't be able to establish any causation, we can analyze association and see which relationships are significant, meaning we can determine if a relationship between the constructs does exist. And we hypothesized that these psychological risk factors would exert a direct effect on violent extremist intentions, but we also expected that they would indirectly influence violent extremist intentions by being linked to stronger engagement in conspiracy thinking, which in turn will be also associated with increased violent extremist intentions. And in order to test all of that, we ran several separate mediation models, which I will present in the following. So the first hypothesis looks at dogmatic thinking styles. And if we look at the results, we can see that having stronger dogmatic thinking, having a stronger dogmatic thinking style is linked to stronger conspiracy beliefs. So that means that people who scored higher on the dogmatic thinking scale also tended to score much higher on the conspiracy scale. And this in turn, so having a stronger conspiracy mentality is in turn related to more violent extremist intentions. So what we can say overall is that dogmatic thinking styles indirectly is related to more violent extremist intentions by increasing conspiracy thinking. So the second hypothesis examines the effect of individual alienation. And if we look at the results, we can see that alienation is associated with a stronger conspiracy mentality. And again, these stronger conspiracy beliefs are associated with more violent intentions. Therefore, we can say that alienation indirectly exerts its effect on violent extremism by being related to stronger conspiracy beliefs. And here we can also see that all paths are significant, the direct and the indirect ones. So the third hypothesis examines how collective deprivation is associated with more extremist intentions and stronger conspiracy beliefs. And the results here also show that all our paths are significant. And again, collective deprivation is related to a stronger conspiracy mentality, which as before is then associated with more extremist intentions. And we can also see that the indirect effect is significant, meaning that collective deprivation indirectly increases violent extremist intentions. So let's turn to the expected protective factors mediations. And here we first hypothesized that holding more positive attitudes towards authorities, such as law enforcement and the government, would be linked to less engagement in conspiracy thinking and to less extremist intentions. And the results show a negative sign for the relationship between procedural justice and conspiracy mentality, meaning that experiencing more positive attitudes towards authorities is indeed linked to less conspiracy beliefs. And in turn, experiencing higher levels of procedural justice is also indirectly related to less extremist intentions. So the second hypothesis examines the effect of locus of control. Similarly to the results in the previous slides, individuals with a stronger internal locus of control seem to hold less conspiracy beliefs. So overall, having an internal locus of control, such as feeling in control of one's life, is directly associated with less violent intentions, but also indirectly by being associated with weaker extremist intentions. So intuitively, it makes sense that having a stronger internal locus of control and experiencing more procedural justice is linked to less conspiracy thinking and to less extremist intentions. But we can't build policy and practice on intuition. So therefore, this is a really reassuring empirical finding, which may help to inform evidence-based preventative approaches. So to conclude the first study, we argue that it is important to examine the underlying psychological factors linking conspiracy beliefs to violent extremism. The results show that if individuals are deprived of certain epistemic, existential, and social needs, they are significantly more likely to engage in conspiracy thinking and to hold violent extremist intentions. So importantly, when people hold positive attitudes towards law enforcement and other authorities, and when they perceive to have more control over their lives, they engage in less conspiracy thinking and have weaker extremist intentions. Therefore, we argue from a preventative perspective, much more research into the protective factors for conspiracy beliefs and violent extremism is required. So let's move on to the second empirical analysis, which is based on a German national representative telephone survey, which was conducted in 2019 and which consists of 1,502 participants. We conducted this research in order to study individual predictors for violent extremism and to analyze risk as well as protective factors within the general population. So a couple of months ago, Paul and I published a paper where we looked more closely at the conditional effects of conspiracy beliefs and violent extremist intentions. And of course, the prevalence of conspiracy beliefs within violent extremism didn't just emerge with the pandemic, but had been there and had been evident within previous terror attacks. So this was the reason why we started to collect data in 2019 already. So we first started off by examining whether having a stronger conspiracy mentality, so holding a general tendency to engage in conspiracy thinking, would predict more violent extremist intentions. But more specifically, we were really interested to see whether this relationship depends upon different individual characteristics, such as varying levels of self-efficacy, self-control, and low morality. And we expected that people will vary widely in their susceptibility to violent extremism. So to put it simply, we hypothesized that certain individuals who have that combination, so those who believe in conspiracy theories and have a certain type of personality, are much more likely to engage in violent extremism compared to those who only hold conspiracy beliefs. And to test this, we ran 3 separate moderations. So we measured conspiracy mentality and violent extremism with the same measures as we did in the first study. Self-efficacy refers to beliefs that one can successfully perform an action, which is based on perceptions that individuals hold about their own capabilities. Then self-efficacy was measured with, for example, if someone opposes me, I can find means and ways to get what I want. The measure of self-control taps into the constructs of impulsivity, risk-taking, and thrill-seeking. And an example item is, sometimes I will take a risk just for the fun of it. So lastly, the construct of legal cynicism can be described as a mechanism which leads to the disengagement from internal obligations to comply with the law, rules, or social norms. An example item is, sometimes it's necessary to ignore rules and the law and to just do what you want. So if we look at our first individual difference measure, we expected that individuals who experience a risk factor, such as conspiracy beliefs, those with a high sense of self-efficacy may feel more capable of taking action in order to redress those grievances, and subsequently will show a stronger willingness to engage in violent extremism. Turning now to the results, this figure shows that when self-efficacy is high, conspiracy beliefs have strong effects on violent extremism. And you can see that here with that dark blue line. However, these effects are diminished when self-efficacy is average, which you can see here with the middle line. And they're even weaker when self-efficacy beliefs are low, which is the light blue line here. And here you see that conspiracy beliefs are increasing, and here you can see violent extremist intentions are increasing. So our results suggest that those individuals scoring highly in both conspiracy beliefs and self-efficacy beliefs may feel more capable of taking violent action in order to redress their grievances. Our second analysis then looked at the effects of self-control, and we hypothesized that the effects of conspiracy beliefs are contingent on individuals' capacity to execute self-control. And our second conditional analysis reveals that conspiracy beliefs affect violent extremist intentions, particularly when individuals have low self-control, which you can see here with the dark blue line. On the other hand, when individuals have high self-control, which is the bottom light blue line here, having conspiracy beliefs does not relate to more violent extremist intentions. We can even see here a slight decrease. So therefore, self-control can be defined as an interactive or buffering protective factor. So our third analysis looked at law-related morality, and we expected that higher levels of legal cynicism will increase these effects. And if we look at the results of legal cynicism, we can see that conspiracy beliefs particularly affect extremist intentions when legal cynicism is high, which you can see here with the dark blue line at the top. The effects are much weaker for individuals with average levels of legal cynicism, and importantly, when legal cynicism is low, which you can see here with the bottom line, the relationship becomes negative. Therefore, we can also argue that legal cynicism may act as an interactive protective factor in that relationship. So to conclude this study now, it's really important to mention that recent findings are increasingly pointing to the crucial role of conspiracy theories in advancing the agendas of extremist groups. Our findings have confirmed that link, but they also highlighted the conditional nature of that relationship. So overall, our results confirmed that the effects of conspiracy thinking on violent extremist intentions are much stronger for individuals who have lower self-control, who score high on legal cynicism, and who have stronger self-efficacy beliefs. But we have also seen, so conversely, when stronger conspiracy beliefs are held in combination with high self-control and a strong law-related morality, violent extremist intentions are much lower. And we argue that it's actually in these circumstances that when a risk factor is present, that the true value of a protective factor becomes clear. And this might give important insights into things like how we could prevent or counter violent extremism. So overall, I would argue that just having conspiracy beliefs does not tell much of the story, particularly as we have seen that so many people actually hold conspiracy beliefs. However, we argue if conspiracy beliefs and certain individual factors are present, we can really argue or see that the engagement in violent extremism becomes much more likely. And in fact, it may be that these certain individual differences could maybe explain why certain individuals engage in violence, while others holding, for instance, similar conspiracy beliefs do not. And the takeaway message really is that it's insufficient to purely focus on the independent effects of conspiracy narratives and violent extremism. Instead, we suggest that studies should also incorporate the conditional and the contextual nature of these effects in order to capture a much more nuanced picture. And as before, we urge more research into the protective factors for conspiracy thinking as well as violent extremism. And of course, but unfortunately, we won't have time to speak about that today. We really need to implement evidence-based prevention and intervention programs, which try to address these risk factors early on before they properly take hold and before they become so deeply ingrained that they're almost intractable. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Bettina, for this
You're welcome.
Excellent presentation. You will have seen that there have been lots of questions.
No, sorry, I didn't really see it. Yeah.
You will not have seen them, but, and I'm going to summarize them for you, or I will try. We have about 10, maybe 15 minutes left. And I've been trying to bring some questions together. The first,
Okay,
I think there was a number of questions relating to measurements, and you will be surprised to hear, and the kind of like the question of general propensity towards conspiracy beliefs versus more specific beliefs about specific conspiracies. So Mia Bloom, there was an anonymous question, Emma Rusky, Diego Fleitas, Alison Liebling, about, I think I just want to raise two questions here. What do you think is the difference between specific types of conspiracy beliefs and a general propensity towards conspiracy beliefs? Or more specifically, do you think that the scale that you have covers, for example, left-wing conspiracy theories and right-wing conspiracy theories equally well, or religious conspiracy beliefs and non-religious conspiracy beliefs? What do you think?
Yeah, so the measures we operationalized did measure that generally a general tendency to engage in conspiracy thinking, which of course is different than really looking at specific narratives on the far left or far right. I mean, interestingly, what we have seen, so I had also a scale in the survey from 1 to 10. Where would you position yourself, on the very left, on the very right? And what we saw that actually people on the far right and on the far left tended to have such an extreme conspiracy mentality. So I don't think it necessarily captured people more on the right or left, but I think it was quite even. Yeah, I think in terms of risk factors, if you look what risk factors would predict then a general conspiracy mentality or specific narratives, you might see differences, as you see that generally what we see with far left extremists, they tend to be slightly more educated, they tend to be more middle class. That's of course also generalization, but that's what we see in our survey data. So it depends on what risk factors you would measure. But if you measure risk factors like being deprived, feeling alienated, it's really those ones which we see more for people on the far right, I would say. So yeah, I mean, we haven't tested any specific conspiracy narratives, apart from we had like another measure where they generally measured if they have conspiracy beliefs towards science or towards aliens, things like that. And we could see that the strongest for all of them were for anti-government conspiracy theories. But yeah, I think depending on if you look for different conspiracy narrative, you would see different risk factors predicting that, if that explains the question.
No, that's very helpful. There was a 1 second kind of like group of questions that arose in the questions relating to your data, which I just wanted to share with the audience. And that's about a group of questions relating to response bias or participation in the study. I think there are 2 or 3 questions here that are intertwined. How confident are you that people who are very high on conspiracy beliefs are willing to participate in such a study? Or would they think that somebody who calls them for a survey is part of the conspiracy themselves? I think there is a related question about responses. Are you willing to show that you have a conspiracy belief? And I wanted to add another question that brought up, namely relating the extremist tendencies. You have samples of maybe 1,500 participants, and I just wonder what your thinking is about how many actual violent extremists you expect in a sample of 1,500 participants that are drawn across different age groups and the general population.
Okay, so I'll start off with the first question. So I actually really hope we captured those conspiracy believers, because as you have seen with our data, 21% of like all respondents, like for Germany that was, in the UK was much higher, 37%, agreed or fully agreed. So on a 1 to 7 scale, scored like 6 or 7. So I actually think that we captured those conspiracy believers. And but yeah, of course, you can never be sure with survey data. You don't know that. That's also why I didn't include people who somewhat agreed, because I really wanted kind of to have the hardcore believers who say, okay, I really agree or I strongly agree. So that's the first question. And then could you repeat the second one?
It was the question about, well, one of the questions was about the violent extremist beliefs.
Yeah.
Whether what you think about these beliefs, how strong actually linked to action, because there can't hundreds of thousands of violent extremists engage in violent action.
Yeah, so I mean, that's again the thing with survey data. Of course, you never know if they would ever do anything. We only have measured intentions. We didn't measure any previous behaviors. So we really try to operationalize a scale which comes or gets as close as possible to actual engagement in violent extremist behavior, which we could operationalize in a national sample, and we could get ethics from UCL. So we really tried to measure those intentions. But I mean, we know there's so many people out there who have extremist or violent extremist beliefs and intention, and they will never act upon that. So what we then really try to do with our first analysis, we try to get a bit closer by looking what certain individual differences make that relationship much stronger, just to break down that relationship, because not because someone just has conspiracy beliefs will actually act upon them, or if someone has extremist intentions. But we really try to, with running these moderations, see when can we see increased effects. But of course, we don't know. So overall, 12% of our whole population sample somewhat agreed or fully agreed to the violent extremist items. So, I mean, that's pretty shocking if you even take it down a bit and say they're inflated. If 100 people or 1,500 people would really do something, we would have like attacks the whole time. So I think this is one of the challenges when you have survey data. You can run all these statistical quantitative analyses, but you don't know how representative that is, or if you actually find the factors which will mobilize people from beliefs on tensions to action. And I think that's not what you can do with survey data. The survey data is really looking at the early processes where people have these extremist beliefs and intentions. But I mean, yeah, further we can't really go with survey data. So it's more really on the early prevention, I would say.
Okay. This leads me to the last question. We're coming to the end of the session. But you can pick the question. I will pose two questions that came up in the questions, and then you can pick whichever you like better. One was a question that was raised by several of the participants relating to media effects and the internet. And I'm sure that's something that many people in the audience would like to understand where your thinking is about what the role of the internet, maybe the dark web, and other web-based communication channels are. The second question that was raised was the question about what specifically do your findings mean for prevention? And you alluded this previously in your comments, and you had on your slide that more research on prevention strategy is needed. But if you had to say something now about what kind of prevention strategies you think might be most promising, what would you say? So you have you can choose between either or, the media question or the prevention question.
I think I would give the prevention question to Paul, because he hasn't said anything yet, and I think he has some good answers to that.
Paul?
Well played, Bettina. So on the prevention thing, really what we're interested in is this issue about how only trying to counter somebody's extremist narrative would be.
My apologies for interrupting you. Can you on your camera so people can see you? Fantastic.
Yeah, okay. I'll see the numbers drop off now. So basically, one of the things that we're trying to kind of demonstrate here is in that a lot of our other work on people that did cross over the threshold into violence on behalf of an ideological group or were school shooters, what we often found in their backgrounds was that they had a number of other extreme beliefs that they held at different points of their life. And that at the moments that we saw them conduct the violence, this was just the latest kind of t-shirt that they were wearing, to use our colleague Noemi Bahana's language. So they sort of jumped between extremist ideology to extremist ideology. And, it was very fashionable for a time to sort of push forward these kind of counter-narrative approaches as being the sort of the go-to prevention effort. And the idea behind them is that, you sort of sit down and try to deconstruct that person's belief system and send them towards a sort of being a healthy citizen with what is considered to be a healthy set of beliefs. But our argument was that if that's all you're doing is countering their beliefs and then putting them back into the community, there's a high likelihood that they're either going to adopt a different extreme position or a potentially harmful kind of conspiratorial position about something else. So what we were interested in was looking at those kind of static background risk factors, which are sort of underpinning people's transition towards conspiratorial beliefs and violent extremist beliefs. To say that it's insufficient just to try and counter the narrative, you need to be sort of fixing the sort of root causes of how they got to that position in the first place.
Thank you very much. I would like to finish here. I would first like to thank both of you for an absolutely fascinating, interesting presentation. And you could see that the audience was participating very actively in this conversation. Thank you so much for participating. I just wanted to briefly mention, Simone already brought this up, that the presentation will be available online on our website. It will be taking a few days until it's available. I just would also like to thank Simone Castello for organizing the webinar for us and making sure that it all runs smoothly. And finally, I would like to thank the audience for joining in and participating and asking questions. I hope you enjoyed this event, and I look forward to seeing you again for one of our webinars. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Bye.